Okay, Daniel chapter 7. So I want to give you some background into Daniel before we get into chapter 7 and kind of remind you of the outlay of the book. The first 6 chapters are what we would call historical narrative. They're times, places, things that physically happen that are relayed to us. The way it starts out is Nebuchadnezzar is in the Holy Land, and he grabs the nobleman's sons and takes them back, 70 of them, back to Babylon. Among those group of men are Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. We know them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They all were given Babylonian names to identify with Babylonian gods. Chapter 1, they're going to get all the food from the table of the king because they're in training now, so they got to have a proper diet. And Daniel says we just want to eat vegetables and water because he knew that A, it wasn't kosher, and B, it was sacrificed to idols, and that violated his conscience. So they drew a line, and they were healthier, and they were smarter, and they were more keen and acute than their peers. So then they get promoted into the service of Nebuchadnezzar. Chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. That dream disturbs him. He wants to know what the dream is and the interpretation. And one of his Chaldean advisors says, only the gods can tell you. Like only a divine being can tell you. Well, Daniel asks for time. He ends up coming in and says, I don't know, but there's a God who will tell you, right? So God is the star and the champion of Daniel 2. And he sees a statue, which is Gentile kingdom history, right? From Babylon to Medo-Persia to Greece to Rome to a revived Roman Empire. It's right there in that statue. Chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar says the head was gold, which is Babylon, so I'm going to make that statue of all gold because Babylon is going to exist forever, right? It's the 1,000-year Reich that lasts for 12, kind of thing. And what happened? Well, the plain of Dura. Daniel's probably out of town. Daniel's out of town doing business, something, because he's not there. But the 3, which knows Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, out of all the thousands of people, when all the music starts, and they're all told to bow, what do the 3 do? They stand there, right? They don't bow. And so they get thrown in the fiery furnace. And we know it was hot, 7 times hotter, because the men who threw them in were consumed. And when they're in the furnace, they don't get consumed. They don't even smell the smoke. And there's one that looks like, in Nebuchadnezzar's words, the son of the gods, which we believe is Jesus Christ, walking with them in the fiery furnace. So Nebuchadnezzar continues to see the hand of God. Chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, he has a dream, and that dream is that he's going to become a beast and be removed from his kingdom and then be restored at the end of that time. And he writes his testimony in chapter 4 that that's exactly what happens, and he looks up and realizes who God is, who he is, his sanity returns to him, and he gets back his kingdom back. By the time we get to chapter 5, his grandson is ruling in Babylon. His father, Nabonidus, was off warring, and he left his son at home to run Babylon, and they're having a big party, and they're drunk, and while they're drunk, there's a handwriting on the wall. Mene, mene, tekel upharsin. Your kingdom has been weighed and found wanting, and that night, the Babylonian kingdom is done, and the Medes and the Persians come in. As the Medes and the Persians come in, Cyrus, who's named by name in Isaiah 44 and 45, which you can look up and read that. The Lord names him by name well over 100 years before Cyrus even existed. And Cyrus is the one that returns them back to rebuild their temple and their land. Darius is ruling over Babylon, and he signs a document, which we looked at last week, that says no one prays to anyone except him. And Daniel opens his window, as he always does, to the temple, which he always did, asked the Lord to return them to the land and fulfill Jeremiah 29:11. It's not about your own personal prosperity. That's what he wanted. And he was praying that God would return them to the land and restore them. He did it 3 times a day, as they would do at the temple. And they caught him, the Chaldeans, and they took it before Darius. And he went to the lion's den, which we looked at last week. And he spent the night in the lion's den, petting those furry creatures because they didn't eat him. And in the morning, poor King Darius couldn't sleep. In the morning, Darius calls Daniel, did your God who you constantly serve save you? And Daniel says, open up, I'm here. He lets him out. And the people who got Daniel in the lion's den ended up going in the lion's den. And the lions were hungry because they were consumed before they hit the ground. So that's all the historical narrative. Chapter 7 is like a hinge where it starts to go through what we call prophetic statements, okay? When you think of the prophecies of Daniel, it's not the first 6 chapters. The first 6 chapters, many of you, if you went to Sunday school as a child, heard those particular accounts, or at least some of them, right? Fiery furnace, lion's den, some of those really popular ones. When we get to chapter 7, we're looking at prophecy. Now, I'm going to tell you, as you look at chapter 7, the first verse in chapter 7 says, the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. Okay, so immediately we know, okay, this is during the time of the Babylonian kingdom, but chapter 6 was during the time of the Medes and the Persians. So this goes somewhere between chapter 4, when Nebuchadnezzar makes his confession of faith, and chapter 5, when Belshazzar is having his party and Babylon disappears. So it's maybe about 554, around that area. It's between Daniel chapter 4 and Daniel chapter 5. During this time, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay on his bed. Now, some people get really worked up about what's a dream and what's a vision. You know, is a dream when he's sleeping and a vision when he's awake? Yeah, that's fine. Let's go with that. I'm not going to get really worked up about that. He's likely kind of dozing in and out of sleep and seeing things as he dreams, and then also visions as he's awake. It's in his mind as he lay on his bed, so that kind of gives us context as to what he's doing. He's kind of in and out of sleep, and he's seeing this unfold. And then he wrote down the dream down, and related the following summary of it. So we're about to read what Daniel saw. Now, his good friend Nebuchadnezzar, because he was quite close to Nebuchadnezzar, has died. The kingdom is being run by the grandson who's, it's always those politicians' kids, right? Like, just a crazy guy, out of control. And he's not really being used very much, right? He's kind of in a little bit of obscurity, because in chapter 5, it's the grandmother that comes in and goes, one of the captives of the people from Judah, he will help you with the dream. So they call him in, and Belshazzar didn't even know who he was. So he had been in a situation of prominence. Now he's not. As an older man, he's in kind of obscurity, and then he will raise to prominence with Darius. And so he starts to write this down. This is what God wanted to tell him. So I was looking at my vision by night, and behold, 4 winds were stirring up the great sea. So 4 winds are 4 points of the compass, and the great sea, to him, would have been the sea that everything in this dream occurs around, and that's the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, when you look on a map, you can see certain bodies of water. I always laugh because it's easy to spot North America, because you just look for the Great Lakes, and you kind of have an idea where we are. For them, the Great Sea was the Mediterranean. So there's a stirring of the Mediterranean, right? And we read about the sea in places like Revelation 13, which we will turn to. And so he sees the stirring of the sea. Now, some people relate that to humanity, and they would take that out of Revelation 13:1, but we'll get to that in a minute. And he sees in verse 3, 4 great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. Now, we see a lot of beasts and imagery in the scriptures, and what's interesting is sometimes it's easy to relate what they are, and sometimes we have to kind of piece it together, and we're going to do that this morning. And I studied a number of different people who have differing perspectives on this, and I'll give you a few different ones as we look through it together. All right. So, he's there. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. Now, I mean, you got to think, as he's kind of dozing and he's seeing these beasts, he's like, a lion with wings of an eagle, until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, with a human mind was given to it. So we start to go through and say, okay, so what's he talking about here? What's this lion? Lots of nations pick the lion as their symbol, right? I mean, I read Ben Franklin's autobiography. It's very interesting. Brilliant man. But, you probably know he wanted to make the turkey the symbol of the United States. I don't know how you go into battle with the turkey. Gobble, gobble, here we come, I'm glad we picked the eagle, But like you think about lions, right? I mean, obviously, like Great Britain has the lion. Even on their soccer kits, their football kits, their jerseys, they have the symbols of the lion. So, so it's kind of interesting that this is a nation that identifies with a lion. Well, it is really, this is really kind of relaying chapter 2. Because if we go back to chapter 2 and we look at chapter 2, in this vision that he had, right? And I just want to give you the statue and the vision, and hopefully that will give us some context as to what he's talking about. So in chapter 2, he gets the vision. If you go to verse 32, the head of the statue was made of fine gold. Its breasts and arms were of silver. Its belly and thighs were of bronze, and its legs were of iron, and its feet were partly of iron and clay. Now, when we went through chapter 2, we focused on the stone, which is the next verse, which is Psalm 118:22. The stone the builder rejected is Jesus Christ, who crushes all the Gentile kingdoms. But this statue, we've got a head of fine gold, which we know as Babylon. You got the breasts and arms of silver, which we know as the Medo-Persians. The belly and thighs of bronze, which is the Greeks. The legs of iron, because it crushes everything, is Rome. And then the feet of part of iron and part of clay is, we believe, a revised Roman Empire. So keep that in the back of your mind as we're in chapter 7, because the first beast is what looks like a lion, wings of an eagle, and they were plucked, and it stood up like a man, and it was given the mind of a man. We look at Daniel again. We go back to Daniel. If I go to Daniel chapter 4, verse 36, Nebuchadnezzar says this when he looked up to heaven and realized who God was. In verse 36, he says, "At that time my reason returned to me, and my majesty and splendor were restored." Nebuchadnezzar was given the mind of a man. So we could say that this is likely a reference to Nebuchadnezzar, because he lost his mind, even though he was the king of Babylon. And having a leader lose his mind, it happens sometimes. The Soviets had a guy named Brezhnev who lost his mind. We have fortunately never had that in America, but it does happen. I've read. And so then he looked up and realized who God was, and his mind, his human mind, was restored to him. And so we see that as Babylon. So that's the first beast, okay? And he stands up like a man. After that, he sees another beast. I mean, you got to think, he's like in and out of this dream going, this is pretty terrifying, right? Resembling a bear. And it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth and between its teeth. And thus they said, "Arise, devour much meat, take much dominion." The bear is raised up on one side, and it has the 3 ribs in its mouth. They believe that this is the Medo-Persian Empire, and that it was two, the Medes and the Persians, and then it became the Persian Empire. They kind of work together with the Medes, and it's always when you have 2 groups working together, one is going to dominate the other one in the end, and that's what happened. So that kind of makes sense why it was raised up on one side, the Persian side. 3 ribs are in its mouth. Sometimes they look at the 3 nations that they conquered prior to that. And between his teeth, it says, "Arise and eat much meat, or take much dominion." Those 3 nations would be Egypt, Libya, and Babylon. So those would have been like maybe the 3 ribs, because they're like the 3 nations they conquered. So that's probably makes sense that it's this Medes and the Persians, and take much dominion is devour much meat. Again, note, there's no insects. You guys know how I feel about eating insects, right? I keep getting terrified about the WEF making us eat insects. So eat much meat. There you go. Some of you men will now take that as your life verse. Daniel 7:5. You'll put that on a pillow. "Arise, devour much meat." Give one to me, please. All right. After this, I kept looking, and behold, another, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird, and a beast, which also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Okay. This is the next nation. The leopard is Greece. And so let's look. What's a leopard? A leopard is super fast. And what did Alexander the Great do? He moved like lightning, right? Like he was super fast. And he Hellenized the known world, which is why the Romans, the language of the Romans was Greek, right? And the gods were Greek. Zeus, Jupiter. Aphrodite, Venus. Like they just gave it a Roman name, but it was a Greek god. So they adopted Greek culture. They adopted Greek language. They adopted Greek religion. And it says, arise. It says, behold, another one like a leopard. So he's fast, and that's Alexander the Great. 4 wings like a bird, and the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that the next nation that's coming to run the Gentile world is Greece. And it's going to move fast, and it's going to have 4 heads at the end. So Alexander the Great's on his deathbed, because people think he was poisoned. I don't know. They say he got the flu and died. I don't know. Maybe he had COVID before it was cool. I don't know. But the point is, he's dying, and they ask him on his bed, who gets the kingdom? Who gets the kingdom? And he said, the worst thing you can say as a leader, unless you want to have a lot of intrigue. And he said, it's going to go to the strong one. Right? So they're like, okay, let's, it's going to be like MMA cage match. Like, what are you talking about? Give a name. But he didn't do that. So he ended up having 4 generals take 4 areas of his kingdom, which divided up. And that's what the 4 heads are, the division of those kingdoms. I could give them to you, but that's really not important for our study. It's just important to know that the 4 heads are the generals that divide into 4 geographical locations that break up Greece, which is why the Romans had such an easy time taking them over. After this, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying, extremely strong. Okay, this is Rome, okay? Rome was like super good at just like crushing things and dominating people. And it had large iron teeth because it chewed up everything. It devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And it was different from all the other beasts. For a few reasons, Rome was different. Rome was that beast that when it came into a nation, it let you continue with your religion if you wanted. What it really wanted was control, taxation, and you had to, eventually say Caesar's king. He's your God, and that came later. And if you did that, you could go do whatever you want with your other religion, right? The reason the Christians were persecuted when they because Jews had a special classification when they were seen as separate from the Jews because they wouldn't say Caesar's our king, which is something they had to do every year when they just had to pay the tax and say Caesar's our king. They got the stamp and they were good. But the Christians said, we're not doing that. And so then they were seen as a rebellious sect, and that's partly why they were persecuted. So this is extremely dreadful Rome. It's strong. It's got iron teeth. It breaks things down. And then it says, it's different from all the beasts. And it said it has 10 horns. Okay, so what does that mean, 10 horns? 10 horns. Okay, so let me... this is where I take a break. I don't know. Who's going to take over? I'm sorry, I'm just kidding. I was listening to a pastor the other day, and he said, I've been preaching 40 years, and I've never had to go to the bathroom during a church service. I was like, that's a miracle. Anyway, praise the Lord. All right, so let's go back to 10 horns. So I'm going to go to Revelation 13. Revelation 13, okay? And we're gonna try to zero in on some stuff. So the best commentary on the Scriptures is the Scriptures. So when you hit a question in the Scriptures, the best thing to do is to try to figure out if it's said somewhere else. And as mentioned today in our inductive Bible study class, which we're doing at 9 a.m. on Sundays, if you want to learn how to do it, we start Titus next week. You're more than invited. But it was mentioned, if you can find something in the other testament, it even has more weight, all right? It's good to find it with another author. It's good to find it in another kind of literature. But if you can find it in another testament, it adds even more weight. So let's go to Revelation 13, okay? And in Revelation 13, it says, And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. This would be the Mediterranean Sea. Now, the dragon is, we know who the dragon is, because if you look back at chapter 12, verse 9, it says, the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, serpent, who's called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world and is thrown down to the earth. And his angels were thrown down with him. So if you look at that, who's the dragon? Well, we know that's Satan. Okay, so that's clear. So when you look at chapter 13, verse 1, you don't need to go, who's the dragon? It tells you in chapter 12, verse 9. And the dragon stood on the sands of the seashore. And then I saw the beast coming out of the sea. Okay, so this is a beast coming out of the sea, and we're going to figure out who this is. Having 10 horns and 7 heads. The horns were 10 diadems or kingdoms, and the 7 heads were blasphemous names. Okay, so whoever this is, which I'm going to tell you is the Antichrist, when he comes out of the Mediterranean Sea which some people see as the Sea of Humanity, he comes out, presents himself to the dragon, to Satan. He has 10 diadems or 10 geographical regions that he's ruling over. And then he is full of blasphemous names. 7, which is a number of completeness of blasphemies. So everything he says and does is blasphemous. The beast which I saw was like a leopard. Okay, so we got a little bit of grease thrown in there. His feet were like that of a bear. Oh, a little Medo-Persia in there. Mouth of a lion. Oh boy, a little Babylon in there. And the dragon, that's Satan, gave him his power and his throne and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. Okay, so somehow this is a mock resurrection. His fatal wound is healed. Now, what's interesting is, I'm old enough to remember that the Soviets had a leader named Gorbachev who had a birthmark on his forehead, and everybody thought, he's the Antichrist because he's got a mark on his head. Well, he's dead, so he's not, so good news. But this is a real... This is a real fake resurrection. That's what it is, okay? When Moses is talking to Pharaoh and Pharaoh's diviners come in and they do tricks, it's demonic tricks that are done in the supernatural realm. They're real stuff, right? So this is a real, not that he really resurrected at all, but this will be so convincing. It'll be a fake resurrection, but it will be convincing, all right? All right. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. Okay, so now we know this beast that comes out of the Sea of Humanity in chapter 13 is the Antichrist because the whole world follows him. And it says in verse 4, they worship the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast. And they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast, who is able to wage war against him? And there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies. Okay, we remember those phrases out of verse 5. To act for 42 months was given to him. That's the last 3.5 years of the tribulation. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name, the name of God, his character, that is, his tabernacle, that's where they worship, and those who dwell in the earth. And it was given him to make war with the saints and overcome them. Okay, hang on a second. Let's go to Matthew 16, because something's not right here. There's a problem. Unless there's an answer, and I think I've got an answer for you. Matthew 16. Okay. And I'm going to start with verse 15. He, that's Christ, said to them, but who do you say I am? All right, so Matthew 16:16, if you're there, follow along with me. Simon Peter, because he's the oldest, he's a spokesman, answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, or son of Jonah, for flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, because it's by the Spirit, but my Father, through the Spirit, who is in heaven. And I say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock, the rock of your confession," is what he's saying, "I'll build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it." Okay, so the gates of hell, Hades, demonic authorities cannot overpower the church. Can the church get persecuted? Absolutely. The church will exist as Christ wants it to exist until he returns to get it. So if I go back to Revelation 13, tying it into Daniel 7, it says he was given authority, he was given the ability to make war with the saints and to overcome them. So whose saints are these? These are tribulation saints. Because I believe that the church has been removed at the beginning of the tribulation, and that people will come to Christ in the tribulation, and he'll be able to make war with them and overpower them. All right. And authority was given over every tribe, and the people and every tongue and nation was given to him. So we see a leader that's over the whole world. And those who dwell on the earth will worship him. Everyone whose name has not been written at the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. All right, so this is the Antichrist. He speaks blasphemy, right? He's arrogant, and he's got authority from Satan. So let's go back to Daniel chapter 7, because this is where it will help us understand what's next. So the 10 horns sounds a lot to me like it's the 10 diadems or kingdoms that are on the head of the Antichrist as he comes out of the sea. Okay? It sounds like the 10 toes in chapter 2, doesn't it? So if I tie Daniel 2 and Revelation 13, it seems like there's 10 toes, which would be 10 geographical kind of regional areas that they're ruled over. Iron and clay, they don't really adhere together for whatever reason. I have theories on that, but I won't give those to you. But I want to get to verse 8, because verse 8 is where we have some views. I'm going to give you my view, and then I'll give you the other views first, and then I'll give you my view. While I was contemplating the horns, because the 10 horns, what are the 10 horns? Behold, another horn, a little one, came up from among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. Okay, so this little horn is a man, it seems like, and he's proud, and he has great boasts, and we're going to learn later on that the horn also not only speaks boastful words, but he speaks until the beast which was slain, which we're not maybe get into today. So what did we learn in Revelation chapter 13, verses 5 and 6? What's in the Antichrist's mouth? Great boasts, right? Now, let me give you three different views that I've read from this. Well, three, and then I'll give you the third one, which is mine. Okay, there is a perspective that says the little horn, which I do not agree with, is the Roman Catholic Church. And they tie it into certain popes that spoke, which they did in the Middle Ages. I don't say Dark Ages because there was a lot of good stuff happening. It wasn't dark in that they weren't smart. That's pejorative. The church was ruling, and it was Middle Ages. And you know what? There was a lot of good things that went on. But there were a lot of bad popes. So then they quote famous popes and look how bad they were and say that's this little horn. I do not agree with that. There are people you probably know that have that view. There's also a view that this is Antiochus Epiphanes, and they would say that this was already fulfilled, and it was fulfilled at the time when he came into the temple and desecrated the temple. I don't hold that view either, although I read that view from somebody that I trust. I think most compelling view is that the little horn who blasphemes is the Antichrist or the beast. And we'll get into that and why I believe that, okay? Now, if you have the other views, you have every right to be wrong. I'm just kidding. You have every right to think through, all right? And do your research. And if you can prove it biblically, and if I'm wrong biblically, please come show me. And I'll change, like, in a New York minute, which to us in the Midwest is, like, a lot faster than our minutes, okay? No problem. But I believe that the little horn is the Antichrist. I believe that's what he's talking about right there. I believe that's what he's pointing to. And you may say, do you have any more proof, Pastor? And I'd say, well, I'm going to go back to Revelation and give you another verse. And hopefully this will give us some more perspective, okay? All right. So if we look at this first horn, right, who is he? If I go to the book of Revelation, it has kind of these kind of statements about Babylon in chapter 17 and 18. 19 is the return of Christ to the earth, the Bema Seat judgment and the return of Christ, or the marriage supper of the Lamb. And then, but 17 and 18 are the destruction of Babylon, religious and political Babylon. And what's interesting about Babylon is it is kind of an idiom for the world system, okay? That's what it really is. So let's look down at verse 12 of chapter 17. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings that have not received a kingdom. They will receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. So if I go back to Daniel and I look at the 10 horns, I think, okay, the beast is with those 10 horns. So I think verse 8, based on Revelation 17:12, Revelation 13:5 and 6, is likely the Antichrist. That's my view. And then I want to give you one more reason why I think it's the Antichrist. Because he's positioned here as the final world leader who's great and boastful. And if we look at verse 9 and 10, which is where we're going to land, you see, in distinction to the Antichrist, you see a picture of Jesus Christ. Okay? As a matter of fact, this is a beautiful picture of Christ and God, and we're gonna read that now. So we see these horrible Gentile kingdoms surrounding the Mediterranean Sea, which would have been his known, understood world, and we see the destruction, and we see this one at the end of time, this little horn that's the beast that's going to be boastful, and in all of it, the Lord says, Daniel, keep looking, verse 9, until thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. Okay. Now, this is one of the only places in the Bible, actually the only place, that we hear a description of God, because he is the Ancient of Days. His vesture was like white snow. You know when it snows and it's pure white? It's so beautiful. Just pure white. So that's what he's dressed like. His hair was like pure wool. And his throne was a blaze of flames. And its wheels were a burning fire. So he sees God sitting on his throne, his beauty, his glory, his majesty. And if I go to Hebrews 1, there's a very interesting point that's made about Christ. So if you want to flip there with me, I want to just bring this out to you. Hebrews chapter 1. And it tells us about Christ and what he's doing right now. And it's interesting because it ties into this throne. Hebrews 1:1. God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers and the prophets in many portions, in many ways, in these last days, which started at the New Testament time, has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he also made the world. Okay, so Christ gets everything, and Christ also gets the world. It's his world. And he, that's the Son, Christ, is the radiance of his glory, the glory of the Father, the Ancient of Days, the exact representation of his nature. He upholds all things by the word of his power. That's how all things are sustained. When he, Christ, made purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become much better than the angels, and he has inherited a more excellent name than they. So, Christ is where right now? He's seated at the right hand of the Father. Daniel is given a picture of the Ancient of Days sitting on his throne and his glory and his majesty. When the Ancient of Days is sitting on his throne holding this seven-sealed book in Revelation, John looks around and says, I looked in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and I didn't find anybody who could take the seals of that title deed to the earth off. And then he sees Jesus Christ, who comes up to the Ancient of Days and takes that. And we're going to get to that next week as we hit it here in Daniel. And it says a river was flowing, coming out from before him. And thousands upon thousands were attending him. And myriads upon myriads were standing before him. And the court sat. Now this is Revelation 4 when they're worshiping around the throne. And these are willingly serving the Lord, right? It's one thing to do something at the end of a barrel of a gun. It's another thing to do something willingly. These myriads and myriads that are standing before him, they're attending to him, they're serving him willingly. It says, and the court sat, and the books were opened, and that's right out of Revelation chapter 20, where the books are open. And I just want to read that to you quickly to remind you what Daniel is seeing and what books he's seeing. In chapter 20, verse 11 through 15, it says, I saw the great white throne and him who sat on it. Okay, same thing. Sounds like the same throne, doesn't it? In whose presence the earth and heaven fled away, and no place was found for them. So we see a picture of God again on the throne. No description of God, just the great white throne, and that heaven and earth fled from. And I saw the dead, both great and small, standing before the throne, and the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged from the things which were written in the books, according to their deeds. Okay, if you sit through the Titus study, that's a key word, deeds, and that's how the dead are judged. And the sea gave up the dead which were in them, and the death and Hades, that's the holding tank for people who've died outside of Christ, gave up the dead which were in them, and they were judged, everyone according to their deeds. So the books are going to be open, and each person is going to be declared guilty by what they have done in front of God the Father. The Son will be there as well. Death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire, which is the second death, the lake of fire. So all of those who have been condemned because of their deeds go into the lake of fire, and then that's the second death. If anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. Back to Daniel 7. He sees them standing serving the Lord, Revelation 4. And the books were open, Revelation 20. It's interesting because God has a plan for all of human history. Like, he's not waking up and going, what's going on in America? He knows exactly what's happening, okay? We are just a continuation of the Roman Empire because we were birthed out of Britain, and Britain was part of the Roman Empire. And partly the reason why we ascended to power was because of the gold we got in World War II for supplying them with all the war material, if you study history. And we became a great nation, and partly because we were sending missionaries around the globe. And when Britain was sending missionaries around the globe, the sun never set on the British Empire. And then they stopped, and the sun set. And we were sending missionaries around the globe and blessing Israel, and the sun wouldn't set on us. And it will when we stop doing those two things, in my opinion. I could be wrong, but that's my opinion. And everyone's entitled to my opinion. I'm just kidding. The point is that God knows all of human history. So he knows your history. He knows the date you were born. It's appointed to a man, woman wants to die. He's got that date, okay? And in between that birth and that death, he knows your life. He's orchestrating all the world events. I keep up with them, but I don't like wring my hands over them because I know God's in control. And I know that the Ancient of Days right now is sitting on his throne, completely in power. I think he's got his feet up, actually, watching it all play out. He knows what's going on. He knows. He's completely sovereign. I think sometimes as Christians we get so worked up because we're scared. All right? If God can feed Elijah by the brook Cherith with ravens, he'll take care of us. All right? He'll take care of us. So we need to trust in his sovereignty. That's what this text tells me, trust in God's sovereignty. It's telling Daniel to trust in God's sovereignty because Daniel's getting this before the handwriting goes on the wall, before the kingdom gets crushed, and before the Medes and the Persians come in. And everything that he knows gets changed. Right? And I hate to tell you, but he's in his 80s when it happens, likely, okay? And most people in their 80s get really worked up when Tapioca Tuesday, they're out of tapioca pudding, okay? And I can't wait for that Tuesday. I can't wait to get old and say crazy stuff. Actually, I already do. But you know what I mean? But then I won't be held accountable for it. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just saying, like, his whole world's going to get blown up. But the Lord is giving him this vision to say, all of history, Daniel, I have it. And they're all going to sit before me. And they're all going to answer to me because the books are going to be open. But here's the deal. I need you to know this. There's a book of life, the Lamb's book of life. If your name's in that, your sin was judged on Calvary's cross. You are completely forgiven. You need to walk in newness of life and love and serve the Lord. If you've never made a commitment to Jesus Christ, if you've never been regenerate, then you're going to get judged on your deeds. And I'm going to tell you, you're probably a better person than I am. But we're all in bad shape if we're getting judged on our deeds. Right? When Christ died on the cross, he stretched his arm out and he said, Tetelestai, paid in full. Your sin debt's been paid in full. Daniel's being told, before your whole world changes, Daniel, remember, I am completely, utterly sovereign. I have no idea what the future holds for us. I don't know. I don't worry about it, though. I know God knows. And I know God's gone ahead of us. And I know God's going to take care of us. And whatever that looks like, we'll deal with it when we get there. I don't mean you don't plan. I don't mean that. I'm planning, okay? But I'm not planning out of anxiety. I'm planning out of stewardship. It's a difference. Because we have to trust our sovereign Lord. If you're here today and you're struggling with anxiety because you're worrying and you're trying to fix it yourself, the prayer room is going to be open. If Jim will come back with me and Mike will come back with me. If maybe you're just struggling and maybe you say, I don't know if my name's in the Lamb's Book of Life. You can leave here today and know it is by confessing Christ as Lord. And we can walk through the gospel with you, right? No problem. We would love to do that. I'm going to pray. I'm going to invite the worship team back up. They're going to close with the song. And then the prayer room's right through those doors, and we'll be there. Lord Jesus, we thank you so much for your love, grace, your mercy. We thank you, Lord, for the way we know that you are so good to us. We love you. We come to you humbly as your children, and we ask you, Lord, that you would, in our time, work in our lives. Lord, give us the peace that comes from you, that in a world that may be turned upside down like Daniel went through, that we would just trust in your sovereignty. And Lord, give us the knowledge that when we stand before that throne, it'll be the bema seat, and we'll be evaluated for our works because we have come to faith in Christ. And our names are in the book of life. We will not be judged by our deeds because our deeds would condemn us all. God, bless us as we worship you. We thank you for what Christ did on the cross. We thank you for your word, which is unbroken and is true. And from Genesis to Revelation, Lord, speaks to us right now and tells us what we need to know and how we need to live. We love you. Bless us as we sing these praises to you. May they be something that gives you honor and glory. And bless us, Lord, as your people. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen.